Hello, this is Ken Figueiredo, and I want to welcome you back to a third talk with Andreas Kraft on developing open standard IoT systems with oneM2M. So far, we have defined the elements in a basic IoT system. We've learned about Jupyter Notebooks, and we've seen how to use a binder to launch a common service entity. In this session, we will make our first contact with oneM2M through a request and response message. That's right, if I've been following you correct, Andreas.
Hello, Ken, and yes, this short talk will give us a first hand on interaction with the oneM2M CSE. Let me explain what I'm about to show you. You will remember this basic diagram showing a user application interacting with the CSE. The application sends a request message and the CSE returns a response message.
Okay.
In this illustration, I'm showing the kind of exchange that takes place between the user application and the CSE. In essence, the user application says, "Here's my ID, and this is the information I want you to return to me." The CSE processes the request message and returns a detailed profile in the response, which I will show you when we run the system. There are a couple of reasons for showing you this relatively simple procedure. The first is to gain experience with the request-response procedures and the parameters they use. The second is to introduce you to the oneM2M syntax in terms of the rich amount of data that is exchanged in the request and the responses.
Okay, so this request-response procedure must follow some sort of standard or a set of rules.
Yeah, thank you for the question. This all might look very familiar to you because oneM2M procedures are REST-based. That means with just 4 basic operations that are create, retrieve, update, and delete, you may access and manipulate all the resources hosted by the CSE. Let me take you to our Jupyter binder window to see this procedure in action.
Okay, I'll pass control to you.
Before we can start with the interaction, we first have to start the CSE. I've already opened the notebook that runs the CSE. The CSE itself is run by executing the code in the notebook. I'm just positioned my cursor here in the cell, and then I press the run button. Just after a very short moment, you see the output, CSE started, and now the CSE is up and running. Let's switch to the other notebook. Okay, this notebook shows the first basic interaction with the CSE using a REST call to retrieve the root CSE resource. We need to begin by running the first cell on this notebook to initialize some code to help us to connect to the CSE. I do this by clicking here into the cell and then press the run button. After a very short moment, I get some confirmation that the configuration is ready, and I get a very short and very small overview about the resource tree of the CSE.
Okay, and I see you also have an illustration on the right-hand side.
Yes, Ken. These illustrations are for each and every request. I have them here to show and illustrate the interaction between the notebook and the CSE to present the request as well as the responses exchanged between those entities.
Okay, very helpful.
Now we are going to retrieve the CSE-based resource with the following code. This is a retrieve instruction with 4 parameters. The first one sets a target of the request. The second one identifies the originator of the request. The next attaches an identifier to the request. Let's say our application is busy sending a lot of requests. We need the request identifier to match it to a response that might arise sometimes later, so that we can pull it from other several responses received in the system. The final parameter tells us which release of oneM2M we are using. In this case, the system conforms to version 3. So when I execute this cell, the request is sent by pressing this button, and we receive a couple of information. The first one is the request itself. We see the target URL, header information, basically repeating what's in the request itself. You can also see the curl and the oneM2M request entries here, which give you way more details later on of the request you're receiving. The response itself consists of an OK, like a 200, which says the request got through.
So, Andreas, there looks to be quite a lot of detail in the response message.
Yes, there is a header information on the left-hand side, which gives you, for example, a response status code, gives you also the request identifier, the release version indicator, and also the timestamp for this message. If you use your mouse and point your mouse over this and just wait a second, you get a short information about what actually the 2000 here means. In this case, it means, okay, the request succeeded. By the way, you can use your mouse and just hover it for a moment over each of the bold identifier in this request, and you get a couple of information and explanation what it actually means. On the right-hand side, you have the actual CSE base as a response. It is actually a large resource, so you get a lot of information. At the top, you get the resource identifier, the resource name, the identifier of the CSE, and other information as well. This is the basic structure for every request. First, you get an overview about the request, and then the response is the optional content that you receive back in the response. If we scroll down a bit, you get a table with a lot of explanations for each of the identifier, the attributes we used in this request and you received as a response in the resource, so that you don't have to look in the specification to get a first overview about it.
Okay, so that's quite a lot of information we've covered. What are you going to show us next time?
The next time, I will show you how to extend the resource tree in the CSE by registering an application and the data structure for it to store sensor data to read from a device.
Okay, that's great, Andreas. That looked quite straightforward. There's a lot of information to read, and I look forward to our next talk.